Krisa with the Graham Chamber of Commerce, and really excited to be here this morning with you all. And thank you for tuning in and watching. Also, thank you to Texas Made Security, Pete Clark, for making sure that our technical approach works here with our Zoom to Facebook Live. We really appreciate his help. And if you need help with streaming services and a plethora of other things, please give him a call. Also, thank you to Y100.5 for broadcasting our meetings on the radio. We really appreciate your help. Thank you, Tim, for making that possible so that we can reach as many people as want to listen. And then, of course, special treat today. Thank you to Dorman Holub for joining us. We are so excited to visit with you. I'm sure most people tuning in and watching are already familiar with some of Dorman's work, and if you're not, you should be. So take a minute to browse through some of his stuff on Facebook or on the internet. But Dorman's done a wonderful job of researching a lot of our history right here in Graham and Young County. And not only that, but he's also a brilliant storyteller. So I don't think I've ever met anyone who has listened to him speak and hasn't come away saying, if only I could have spent another 3+ hours just listening to all of the stories that he can tell about our history here. So I'm excited to share a little snippet of that with you today, and also want to remind you and encourage you to comment in the Facebook Live with questions or suggestions. Let us know you're watching. Let us know what you like and don't like. But we want to make sure that we're interacting as much as possible with all of our viewers. So again, thank you everyone for viewing and tuning into us. And then Dorman, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's no problem. One of the things that I am very passionate about is Young County, Texas history. And I've enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. It's a great hobby to have. And I sure appreciate you giving me some time to talk with everybody today.
Absolutely.
One of the things we've been doing in our staycation is I've been doing videos. There are over 90 cemeteries in Young County, and believe it or not, on Sunday afternoon, sometimes I'll take my wife out and say, let's go out and look at a cemetery. And, we go out in the cemeteries, look around, and nothing but the best. But unless you know where these cemeteries are, you just, they're hard to find. Some of them are really, really hard to find. And I think yesterday while we were at Paget, Zan kept saying, are you sure we're on the right road? And I said, we'll know when we come to the ruts that look like the mud is impossible. The cemetery's on the left. And sure enough, that's where it was. But yeah, I probably haven't been to that cemetery in 15 years. So, but it looked about the same. So it's kind of I recently did a farmer video. I released it last week, and it has over 5,000 views, and we didn't cover but 7 or 8 years of those people who were buried in the cemetery. But it's a lot of fun. It takes about 80 or 90 hours to do one of those videos by the time you do all the research and video and stuff like that. But it's just a way of keeping the stories of these people who lived up here alive, and that's really important, to keep those stories alive, because if we don't keep those stories alive, they'll disappear. And most people, some of them know these people, and some of them really don't know these people. And I just think that's really important for Graham, but also for Young County, and honestly for our tourism as well. I think it's very important. I think people really are interested in Young County. I used to say this, that Fort Worth is where the West begins, but Young County is where the West actually happened. And I really believe that. I'm very passionate about that.
I love that. And, one of the things that you said, and you've said this to me before, so it's kind of been in the back of my mind. And when we've traveled, I've taken notes and done some comparison, just in, like I said, in my own head. But one of the things, we have a ton of rich history here, and I love the concept of, everyone has a story, and really, if told, it's usually interesting. I think it's even more fascinating when it's somebody we know, or we know the descendants of, so on and so forth. But it's a fascinating story. Our history is rich, and it is filled with trials and tribulations and success stories, and those are always going to be interesting. But one of the things I think that kind of makes Graham specifically stand out is that we take really good care of our cemeteries and take a lot of pride in that. And they are beautiful and well done, well maintained, at least for the most part, and when possible. But that's not the case everywhere. And so the fact that we can go visit our cemeteries, the fact that we can walk around and the grass isn't up to our knees, and the fact that we do have a lot of respect for those sites, I think that says a lot about our community.
Well, you're exactly right. And honestly, man, kudos to the city of Graham, because if people don't recognize it or see it, the crews are out in either the Oak Grove Cemetery or the Pioneer Cemetery, the East Side Cemetery, or even the William Johnston Memorial Cemetery all the time, maintaining those cemeteries. And honestly, kudos to Young County and the Commissioner's Court and the County Judge, because they see to it that the rural cemeteries are maintained. Of course, there's cemetery associations as well out in the county, but almost every cemetery I was in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I mean, we've had all this rain and they've been well maintained. And I mean, City of Graham does a great job. It hadn't always been that way. Years ago, when Pioneer and Oak Grove were opened, they had what they call cemetery associations. And honestly, they didn't have very good practices, because in the early days, as an example, in Oak Grove, you can see that when the grass would get up high in the fall, well, in the spring, before the spring came, they just burned the grass off. And man, you talk about damage to tombstones. You can see where there was some problems with that. But you know, City of Graham took over the big main cemeteries in Graham, and man, they do an excellent job of maintaining those. In fact, every year when we do the Talking Tombstone tour in October, the city manager sends his crews out, and I'm telling you, Oak Grove is pristine when we go out there. And they cut down the old dead trees. They do all kinds of stuff, maintenance that we don't realize. And
Right.
you know, I just think that's really important part, because nobody wants to drive by a cemetery and it just be overgrown. I mean,
Absolutely.
of course, you know, there's sometimes where they, in South Texas, what they do is they use soil sterilant. They use Primatol and wipe all the grass off the face of the earth when they do their cemeteries. But thankfully, that's not what we do here. I mean, it's really pretty, really pretty aspect. And, you know, history, all history is his story and her story. And I think stories are really what engenders people. Now, you know, some people may have heard the story differently, and that's fine. I mean, I've only been in Graham 24 years, and I've only been doing research of Young County history just a little over 20 years. So if you have lived in Graham all your life, or if you've lived in Young County all your life, I would say you know more about the history of Graham than I know. I kind of know the history of Graham from about 1872 to about 1979. So mine's kind of archaic compared to what, you know, more modern people know about the history of Graham. You know, it's kind of like the season that we're in, the Spanish flu season that we're in. The COVID-19 pandemic that we're in. I started doing some research on Graham during the Spanish American flu from 1917 to 1920. And a lot of the difficulties that parents are experiencing now are the same kinds of difficulties that parents, you know, endured in Graham between 1917 and 1920. One thing that I might mention to everyone is that in 1917, after the very first football game, we played Wichita Falls, and Wichita Falls came to Graham to play that game. And we played at the very first football field, which in 1917, the first football field is down close to where Fireman's Park is located. And we played Wichita Falls, and after the game was over, sometime in the evening, the Graham school burned to the ground. And that was grades 1 through 11. And so the citizens of Graham decided actually that students would homeschool. A lot of the churches in town opened their buildings. There's Baptist, the Methodist, the Presbyterians, and the Christian church in that time period. So they opened their church buildings so that they could use for school. But a lot of parents homeschooled their children. Just to put it in perspective, that from grades 1 through 11, in 1917, there were 600 kids. And Graham did not have regular, are you ready for this, Chris? Graham did not have regular classes in a school building until the fall of 1919. And that's where some people can remember what was called East Ward. And so East Ward, the core section was built in 1919, and then classes then began again in the fall of 1919. One of the things Graham did during the Spanish-American flu, there are 4 roads that lead into Graham. So what they would do is they would set up guards and ask, what is your reason or purpose for coming into Graham? And that was during the oil boom. So Graham was crazy in that time period. People wore face masks according to the newspaper articles. And some of the things that we're doing today, 100 years later, we did 100 years ago. And I know I can't even imagine homeschooling my kids during, this pandemic, but that actually happened in Graham for most of 1917, all of 1918, until the fall of 1919 when they opened the brand new school building.
Oh, that's a long time.
Yeah, in 1919, well, in 1918, from what you can see in the school records, there are about 800 kids in our school system, grades 1 through 11, which I don't know, I think there's 600 or 700 in high school right now, but a lot of it was because of the oil boom, because when they built the new building in 1919 and opened its doors, all of a sudden we had underbuilt. There were more kids because of the oil boom than there were actually school facilities. So, lots of challenges for the school systems in that time period.
Wow. Well, and I think we're all looking forward to the time when we're experiencing another oil boom. And out of this oil situation right now. And of course, looking forward to when we have this pandemic behind us and we become the story that we tell, moving forward. But it is always interesting to think about some of those parallels in history and think about how one day, our grandkids, great grandkids, so on and so forth, will look back and tell the story of the COVID pandemic and how we responded and how we overcame it and how we recovered. And so, maybe I'm just an optimist by nature, but I look forward to that part of the story, the recovery, the rebound, and that being the story that we tell and pass on is how we overcame it.
Well, I think what happened, and it's interesting because when you do the research on it, one of the things I found out was that, well, what happens right after the Spanish flu? Well, we have what's called the Roaring 20s, and everything changed. It was different, and we always talk about, well, let's get back to the normal. Well, normal is only what happens right then, right there at the time. But one of the things that really was kind of curious was after the Spanish flu epidemic, as an example, churches came back roaring almost because, you talk about isolation, you talk about those things that happened with us in the pandemic. Those same things happened in Graham in that time period as well. They went to, they didn't have streaming like we have today. They didn't have Facebook like we have today. And so what those churches would do is they only met once a month. And actually, literally, they met in their buildings once a month. Well, those buildings are far smaller in the late teens of last century than they are today. And, when finally the Spanish flu was out of the way and it was overcome, of course, World War I was over with, and there was a real sense of nationalism, and hey, let's get back into going. And there's a lot to be said for living in a little town out in the middle of nowhere, because even though we talk about you have to come here to get here, in some ways that's not a bad thing, because we're kind of isolated from a lot of things, both, well, lots of people say, oh, I don't have anything to do tonight, or on a Friday night. Sometimes people will say, I just wish there was something to do in Graham, Texas. I'm telling you what, you just need to follow me around every once in a while, because there's tons of things to do in
so
Graham,
much
Texas.
stuff to do.
I mean, I've made it my task for the last 40 something years to actually go around the square and take photos of every building on the square. And then I walk up and down the streets of Graham and I take photos of houses. And the reason is because someday that house is going to be gone, and I want to make sure that I have, a record that it was here. Same thing with,
absolutely.
I do the same thing with Albany or Newcastle or any of the little towns in the area. I mean, I've got pictures of the Eliasville Mill that I started taking in 1977. So,
awesome.
I mean, but it's just that way of recording and remembering, hey, this is what used to be here. Here's what's here. And it's like the oil and gas business. First production wells in Young County is around 1917, 1918. But, there are oil wells drilled before that time. In fact, Colonel E.S. Graham and his brother G.A. Graham, even the Texas Railroad Commission confirms this, that they drilled the very first natural gas well in the state of Texas out by their salt mill. And man, you talk about, potential and, opportunities and what can happen. The oil and gas business has gone through a real stiff downturn right now, but I'm kind of like you. I'm optimistic that it will bounce back. It'll come back, and we'll look back at it and say, "Oh, I remember that. It happened then." I mean, you ask any oil and gas guy, and they'll tell you about the oil and gas business is kind of, you're in a valley for a while, and then you go up on the mountain, and then you go in a valley for a while. But honestly, that's just life too.
Absolutely. Have you seen our new social distancing shirts, Dorman?
I don't think I have. No.
We've got to get you one, because they're super fun, but I'll kind of describe it, and then you can go online and look at it too on shopgrahamtx.com. But they're shirts that we're selling from the chamber that go towards our Shop Local, Eat Local campaign. So all proceeds go towards that campaign. But they have a state of Texas on it with Graham marked on there. And then the major highways, kind of showing that geographical isolation, and then say social distancing since, what is it? What's the year? Because I'm going to mess it up if I try to say it off my memory. Thank you. I was going to say that. I should have just guessed. I was afraid I'd mess it up. But yes, so I think that's really fun. It's kind of a play on what we maybe took for granted or looked at as a negative before has actually been a real positive when it comes to a pandemic, because we are fairly geographically isolated from major thoroughfares.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I'm excited because I'm thinking this was the week that I'm actually going inside of the dinner bell to eat. I've stayed away because of the social distancing, and I've got all the pre-existing conditions, and I'm over 65 and all that stuff. But I really think this is the week that I'm going to go into the dinner bell, and I might even order a Dorman special.
Dorman special. I was going to say you have to. I know they've been missing you too.
Yeah. But that's a part of history. I mean, you can go through the town of Graham and look at all the different restaurants that we have, and I can even remember restaurants that we had in Graham when I first came here. But that's one of the things that's really neat about Graham is that there's lots and lots of different restaurants that have they're in buildings that are incredibly historical. I looked into 526 Pizza when they were doing the remodeling, and I didn't realize it was pier and beam, but I had a feeling it had a couple of cisterns in it, and sure enough, when I went into the building, I could find the cisterns. They were there, and if there's a Nary's on the square, and that's on the old Morrison Smith Hardware Company, and it's got a great history behind it. And it's just like a lot of these places in and around Graham. If you knew what they were before, you'd just go, I didn't know that.
And I had no idea.
Yeah, unless you ask a lot of questions, that's just part of the way the history works. And there's the things about people's history that they want to know or they're curious about. And that's one of the things I'm really excited about with my cemetery videos. I had no idea that people would be that interested in walking through a cemetery and learning the history of people and learning the history of the towns. I'm getting ready to do Markley right now. And man, honestly, I could do a video on just Markley by itself because it was so rich in history. And it's just insane how much history is in Markley. But when you drive through there, you kind of look around and there's an old gas station and an old church building and a cemetery, and you go, well, that's all there was here.
That's it, yeah.
Oh no, it is unbelievable. And I'm probably going to do Hawkins Chapel after that, and then Loving, and there's a lot of history in this area and honestly, one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I realize someday I've got to get all this stuff out while I can. Someday I'm going to retire, and someday I'll have to decide what I'm going to do. And probably one of the things I'll do is, keep telling the history because honestly, if I can find the history, anybody can find the history. It's just my technique of researching, and the videos has changed, really given me another avenue of just sharing this history,
right.
Sharing the information that we have.
Well, and on that note, I'm really excited. We have not officially announced this yet, so I guess this is our official announcement, but we are working with Dorman to produce a series of videos called Discover Graham with Dorman. And we'll be working on the first video of that series very soon. And I will kind of give a little teaser just to build some anticipation about the topic. But it's one that's very, very near and dear to my heart. And I will say that it was Dorman's suggestion, not mine. But I'm super excited about it and excited to hear it because he's going to be interviewing my grandmother, Sammy Knox, and talking a little bit about not only her story and her history, which I find fascinating and very biased, but I think others will as well. But also some of the history of Graham Savings and Loan and the bank. And I think that's going to actually be very interesting for people to learn about as well. So we'll be working on that one launching soon, but we'll be working on a full series. So I think if people, and Dorman, you may kill me for this later, but I think if people have things they're curious about or would like us to focus on, drop it in a comment or send an email, call the office, text, whatever method of communication, but let us know and we can try to put something together. I'm not going to make any false promises here on if you mention a comment or mention a topic or suggest something that we're going to do it, but it's something we could certainly consider. So I think both myself and Dorman are very open to hearing from people on what they're most interested in or what they'd like to learn more about in Graham or Young County. Would you say that's accurate?
Well, I think so. Man, Sammy Knox is like off the charts as far as her knowledge of Graham Savings and Loan. And, Graham Savings and Loan has been in 3 different locations. This is the last location it's been in, and there's a rich history behind Graham Savings and Loan. All the way from Mr. Thornton to Mr. Regal and even beyond. And really that is a story that needs to be told. And honestly, I'm just tickled to death because, Sammy Knox is in a whole nother realm. It's like a dream come true just to talk with her because, she has such a rich history. She not only in the Knox families, but also in, her years and years of experience, really starting at the ground floor and coming up where she was to even her retirement. And one of the things we've talked about, there's all kinds of different things we can do videos on. One of the things we can do is the history of Fireman's Park. What's the history behind that? And And it's got an interesting history. Brandon Anderson and I talked about Fireman's Park, and man, where did that come from? And honestly, Graham also has other little parks within Fireman's Park, but because of time and also because of individuals not understanding the history of that area, just didn't realize what was going on. Like over where the disc golf area is was actually its own individual park at one time. And what is that great big old rock structure that's over in Fireman's Park, over where the disc golf area is? What in the world is that for? Or maybe talking about the grist mill, or what about the salt mill? Or then we could walk around the square, and the square it's a level all by itself. We can talk about the speakeasies during Prohibition, where those three ones located, or we can talk about we know about the theaters over on the west side of the square. We know about the National Theater, and then we know about the Leon, which was originally called the Liberty. And then there was the Palace that not many people know about the Palace, but that people don't realize over on the north side of the square, there were two more theaters. And then over on the east side of the square, there was one more theater. Or, we can talk about the seedy side of Graham. And during the oil boom, there was a part of Graham that, not a lot of people talk about. There's probably a reason for that, but one of the people I love to talk about is buried in the Oak Grove Cemetery. Her nickname was Bubbles, and at her death, I found at least 6 husbands, might be 7, but interesting story about her and the people who are buried around her who don't have tombstones. And so, that's a part of Graham that we kind of think, oh man, we better not talk about that. But I mean, it's people.
It's history.
It's human. I mean, it's just part of the history. And, we can do the churches in Graham. And not only that, there's lots of people in Graham that, we need to talk to now. We need to get their story. One of my most favorite people in the world to talk to is Mary Pitcock. And I love talking to her. And, there was a time that Mary and I and Lewis sat down and talked, and I bet we talked an hour and a half. And the funny part of that story is that Ellen, their daughter, was our camera person, and she got so enthralled in our conversation, she forgot to turn on the camera. And so Mary was gracious enough to let me come back and videotape her again. But
that's so great.
I've interviewed Louise Witkowski and Marjorie Swope, and did some video interviews with them. Marjorie's daughter, Amanda Dandridge, invited me to come over to their house. And so we sat in the parlor and, we videotaped them. And I'm telling you, we talked about all kinds of stuff. And, one of the things I learned is that these little Methodist girls on Sunday afternoons would throw back the rug in the parlor and invite all the boys and the girls in the area to come and dance. And they'd crank up their Victrola record player. And
oh, that's great.
And they would, Marjorie would say, we'd do the jitterbug. And she said, one of the things they talked about is how that they never could get Norman Stovall Jr. to learn how to dance. And I thought that was, it was candid.
That's so great.
One of the things that made that story so neat to me is that Victrola record player they had in their living room, still had it when I've interviewed them. And Louise said, I think I've still got the receipt for that. And believe it or not, she went into the living room and pulled out a drawer, came back with that receipt for that Victrola record player that maybe her parents bought. They bought that Victrola record player on the square over on the east side, and they bought it in a drugstore called City Drugstore, and the name on the receipt was Zell Jewelry Company. And so they bought this Victrola record player and the records from Zell Jewelry Company when it was located in the City Drugstore, which today the City Drugstore is known as Boaz. And but they had the original receipt. And you talk about being lights out, but those girls, they were so much fun. And, there's other people I've interviewed. Some of my favorites are Louis Pickock Jr. Oh, I love to talk to him. And Bruce Street Sr., love to talk to him as well. But recently I've done some interviews with Joe Montgomery. And man, I'm telling you what, Joe Montgomery, he's the funniest guy you'll ever meet. And just warm and genuine. But, honestly, that's part of our history. And there's lots of those kinds of people we need to be interviewing because, when you get in your 70s or your 80s or even in your 90s or even 100, well, Miss Pettis recently turned 100 years old. I mean, you've got to interview those individuals because they have this rich perspective of Graham that nobody else has. I mean,
absolutely
nobody has. But I'm really looking forward to this history series. I think I think it'd be a lot of fun. I think it'd be very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stories about shootouts on the square. There's a lot of stories about bank robberies, and in fact, not long ago, while they were moving everything out of the city hall into the new city hall, the workers over there let me go over there and take photos of the interior of the old city hall, just so I can have from our archival stuff because it's fun. I mean, it's really a fun little hobby to do, and I enjoy my little hobby, I guess.
Well, we do too, and we appreciate you for doing it, to say the least. So thank you for all the time you spend not only learning, but then taking the time to share with others, because I do think we can learn so much from our history and the people throughout our history. And like you said, we have so many great examples that we can learn from. So thank you for being that communication tool for us so that we can learn. And your recall is absolutely amazing. That blows my mind away. You say anybody can do this if they spend the time, and I just disagree with you 100% because most people cannot recall data and dates and statistics like you can, Dorman. That is 1 in a million, I think. So we appreciate you.
I actually forget a lot of things. I mean, I think back and I go, oh, well, I could have said this, or I could have said this, and there's sometimes when I do something, I think, oh my goodness, I can't even remember what that was. But it's just, it's like anything else. If you do it a lot and enjoy doing it a lot, then it seems like it just comes to you. I mean, there's some dates that are really easy to figure out, some things that's really easy to remember. But yesterday Zan and I were driving around, and actually we're in the Prophet community, and there's the old Prophet school, and I saw a guy chiseling putty out of the glass, and I rolled my window down and said, hey, can I come and look at your building? And he said, absolutely. And really that's how all these conversations start, because I think people are interested that you're interested in them. And as a minister, I've spent years and years and years sitting in nursing homes and hospitals, listening to people tell their story, because that's really part of genealogy. Genealogy, the difficulty of genealogy is that we're so busy in our real life, and our parents or grandparents are trying to tell us these stories. And we keep telling them, oh, I just don't have time. I just don't have time. And when we do have time, those people will all be gone. And we'll set to ourselves, we'll kick ourselves, we'll say, oh, I just wish I'd asked. And, that interview with your grandmother. Man, I'm telling you, the opportunity to sit down with her and talk to her about not just Graham Savings alone, but her memories of growing up, her memories of what she experienced, because man, those are rich stories. Now, she's like any other human being. She's like me. I'm going to tell you what I want you to know. I'm not going to tell you everything I do know, because some of that's probably none of your business. And I realize that, I understand that, because that's part of the collecting of photos and collecting of stories, because you want to say, honestly, I'll be honest with you, our interview with your grandmother would be like our interview with other people in the community. We want you to see this video and walk away saying, man, I'm glad I live in Graham, Texas.
Absolutely.
Because that's what the history is about. And that's what I try to achieve when I do my history talks. I want to present the history in such a way, and I want to be honest about the history, but I want to present it in such a way that you walk away saying, man, I really feel good. I really feel good about why I live in Graham, Texas. I mean,
yeah.
Honestly, in some ways, I don't really want to show these videos because I kind of like not having a lot of people in Graham, Texas.
Keep it all to yourself.
There's a bad part about it. We want to be big like Cranberry, but honestly, I don't want the traffic. I kind of like it not having a lot of traffic in Graham, but that's part of our lifestyle. We've got to grow. If we're not growing, then we're losing ground, and that might be a great problem to have.
I could not agree more. So I can't wait. I'm so excited about the first video, and I'm excited about more videos to come. I'm going to check really quick and see if we have any questions on the Facebook Live. I think Lisa's watching that for us, but I just want to double check. Yes,